Very warm welcome to all in this session of In Conversation with Team Hingori Sutras. As written in the Yog Vashisht, he is called the All, but is nothing at all of all that exists. He is known as ego, but no ego is he himself. Our knowledge of the soul is presented to us in the form of an ego that is known by its thoughts, like the empty sky appearing as a blue sphere. Ego differentiates the soul from our ideas of space and time. The mind and subject of thoughts is also known as the ego. It is also called various other names like the intellect, the soul, the mind, illusion, and nature or prakriti. A difficult subject to understand and an equally difficult subject to explain. We at Hingori Sutras attempt to discuss, deliberate, and decode the ego puzzle with our teammates Tara Gujral, Naina Nagpal, and Gajendra Kadam. A very warm welcome to you, team. To start with, good evening. To start with, Tara, may I ask you, what does ego really mean to you?
So, Anjali, to me, the ego is this dark veil of Maya which deludes literally every ounce of our existence. And the closest word, if I were to describe the ego in one word, is ignorance. The more we feed our ego, the further we go away from knowing our true nature. And it is a difficult concept to articulate and explain, no doubt. And no matter how well versed one is in the subject, it's hard to comprehend. And so I'd like to share an example with the audience to do this. When a child is born, imagine a baby. Till the baby is about 1 year old, the child is born in what we call the pre-egoic stage. The child has no sense of identity or self. It is completely subsumed in its mother's body, father's body, in its cot, in its toys, in its room. It doesn't have a sense of being that is separate. As this child gets older, we fuel this child's ego and we say, show us your nose, show us your eyes, show us your ears. And the child begins to realize that, you know what, I'm not a part of what I originally thought I was. I'm separate. I'm a separate entity. I'm a separate being. And this to me, Anjali, is really what I call the birth of the ego. So when you're born, your affinity to the divinity, the consciousness supreme within you is very strong. But when your ego starts to develop, you get further and further away from it.
That's so true, Tara. So this really brings me to the question, Chintu, how did the ego come into existence?
So I think before I answer that, I would want to step back and first let's talk about what ego is, because many of us actually end up thinking ego is that guru or ghaman, but ego is much more beyond that. And if I take that example which Tara just gave in right now, the baby even on the first day actually calms down the moment it is in mother's lap. And the reason that is because it, through the warmth of the body itself, it figures out that, it is its mother. So that is the first level when I can say that maybe, the ego comes into existence from that perspective. On another side, when you look at, we have to communicate, right? And it's not only as human beings that we try to communicate. There are animals, there are creatures which try to communicate. And all of us, try to communicate through sound, smell, touch, vision, taste. And in that process of communication itself, you are starting to define an ego. The water by itself may not be something which has an ego, but the moment you say that this water is hot, or this water is cold, or this water is mixed with sugar, or it has become a coke, we've started giving it a label and a form that can be used to communicate further. And in sense, I would end up saying that you've tried to make a ego out of it. right? So it's important that people or all of us realize that ego is not only one negative sense. Everything around, the moment you try to define its boundaries or its form, it becomes a ego. So I think, Anjali, if that makes sense, I would want to sum it up on, how it came into existence per se. To me, to a fair extent, it is on different levels of communication and the needs of defining it.
Right. Okay. Okay. So then what is spiritual ego?
That's, to a very short answer, I would say spiritual ego may be having nothing but spirituality in it. But, when you really think about it, something like this, when it's a short term or you're this life, you may end up saying that, okay, I have got this car, this, that, I am so-called Gajendra Kadam and all those forms. Those are something which you can associate as an ego to the short term. What happens when we believe that, each one of us is taking life after life or taking birth after birth for doing something? And, that is something that long term is what I refer as, maybe a spiritual ego. Or in another sense, if you would look at that long term of self or Jivatma to become that Paramatma is what you would end up saying that it's a, if at all, I would want to call it a spiritual ego. If I may take a small detour, think about it. I mean, many of us may have visited Mysore or may have heard or come across the Chinnapatnam toys. The interesting thing is, all of these toys are made out of the same trunk of wood. But each toy has got a different entity. Each toy, maybe something is a train, something becomes a doll, something becomes, those kitchen utensils that are being made out of it. Everything has got its own entity, and maybe that is something which is a very short term. But on a very macro perspective, the moment you look at it is a wood. And when you really step back, the carpenter actually looks at everything in its own form and says, this is a wood and what I can make out of it. So think about that wood and that wood into the prime elements, the 5 elements of earth that we are, then automatically that is where, the Paramatma comes into picture. So this 3 put together, if I may say, short term, this life, which is what you're looking at as a short-term ego. Spiritual ego is something which is going to carry it over from one to another. And maybe eventually we'll talk about this karmashaya that goes from one to another. But that log of wood is nothing else but a spiritual ego, which you will carry from birth after birth for accomplishing with the goal of reaching that Paramatma. Does it make sense? Does it come to you, Anjali, from that perspective?
Yes, actually it does. It's very deep here in terms of, but before we really get into something, I think you mentioned the self. So Naina, may I ask you, can the self exist without the ego?
I think the self and ego are 2 sides of the same coin, and one cannot really exist without the other. And what self are we talking about? If you think about it, the physical self survival depends upon the I. It's like I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I need to sleep, eat, breathe. All of this is required for the survival of the physical body. It's not possible. And then we have the spirit self. And the spirit self comes with its own sense of I. Gajendra just spoke about the samskaras and conditioning of several lifetimes, and they come as thoughts and tendencies which bring their own self or sense of self, and their own sense of self-identification, fear, and attributes like I'm a lazy person, I'm impatient, I'm a foodie, I have a fear of water, and so many other conditionings. Anjali, I don't think we can go a day without thinking about the I. And this I is the inherent cause of our existence. So personally, I think the self cannot exist without the ego.
Okay. What about the spirit and the jivatma? Is there a difference between the conventional ego and the spiritual ego, Gajendra?
So yeah, I think certainly they are distinct, right? The moment you look at it, let's talk about conventional ego, and maybe let's start getting into the conventional ego to a bit more form, right? The ego in itself is not only negativity. Let's understand this. It's why we have this I, me, myself. These are only that, the negative connotations to it. But more than that, even the thought of helping someone, or even actually going ahead and helping someone and taking a credit on that, that also accumulates into an ego. Eventually, all of us, if I take my earlier statement of everybody has a goal as a jivatma, which is actually transcending, or it is actually looking forward for itself to become that paramatma. So what is it trying to do? Why, if it is knowing that, then why is that that the short-term life is actually getting entangled into all this ego factors in the short-term life? Think about it this way: if you were playing a game of Monopoly, every lifetime you are rolling up those dices. Every lifetime you are trying to accumulate something, because that is needed within that lifetime. Your survival skill or your survival is also dependent on that. And while you do that, when you are small, the baby, the way Tara tried to bring up, the child is being taught about that this is my nose, these are my ears. Then the child is being told about how, for survival, for its future, it has to go ahead and what all things it may have to do. So it is acquiring, and that I, me, myself is actually getting defined into that. So eventually it is, what it is conditioning itself is to ego. And that early stages of life, the form doesn't have ability to continue thinking that it wants to become Paramatma, but it's the molding stage. So it has to go ahead and take it. So that Monopoly, you are actually playing on those, you cannot do anything. You are actually taking each and every step and first trying to accumulate what you can get. Then comes a long term where you start realizing that, what, I have got all of this, but my goal was somewhere. So you start conditioning and changing yourself to position for the long-term life or the long-term journey. So you are actually preparing up from this to another one. Now, in that sense, when you go, all your practices are going around that, okay, how I can shed off what I have received this life, as well as what may be presented in that board game of Monopoly, where you suddenly get a hidden cache, or you are suddenly thrown into a dungeon for having worked upon something different. But you will still take it positively. You will take it with the intent that, okay, I have to go and still make better out of it. I have to still go and make sure that I'm reaching my end goal. And that is where, the short term versus long term starts playing into picture. If you really think about those who are actually, let's say, the saints by themselves also, in their young age, they may have picked up a lot of those things, but they have shedded it, and then they have moved into a stage where they start giving, right? But still that ego is there, right? And that ego is not the form of saying that, okay, it's not that ghamand wala ego. It's about the continuous thought process where you're training your hard disk that I am going to be that, and all my actions are associated. And that is the, let's say, a positive side of an ego, if at all. We don't need to bring up ego to a very negative. But the good thing is, if it's a saintly or a spiritually evolved person, he's going to be constantly be aware that this ego as a factor is a deterrent in my ultimate journey to become Paramatma, but he will use it as a tool.
I
right?
understand.
He or she.
Yeah. In fact, from what you're saying, how I understand it is what I read in the Bhagavad Gita. That there are 3 types of egos. So even in the egos, there are gunas: the sattvic, the rajasic, and the tamasic. So like a tamasic ego is like what you said. I mean, what we call negative is the barbaric, blind, self-destructive way of looking at it. The rajasic ego is self-centered, causing misery to one, to themselves or to others. And the sattvic ego is like what you were trying to say right now. If it's, as I understand, I hope, just correct me if I'm wrong, is the creative ego that has a protective tendency. And from what you're saying is, you cannot surrender it. At least, what you do is you say you drop the ego. Some say drop it, destroy it, but the ego is something that you keep in your pocket. And as you aspire to go more sattvic, it automatically dissolves, and that is the state of whatever observation. So am I making
Very
sense?
well put. Very well put, actually. And that's where when somebody has to refer this ego, it's very important to keep that in mind, that don't take it always in a negative sense. If you make it as a tool,
Right.
then you are aware, you are using it and doing it for whatever is right for your end journey, end mission, that I want to be Paramatma.
Right. So then are there 2 egos connected in any way? Physical and spiritually?
Yes, they are, right. I would want to call it as the conventional ego and spiritual ego, something like a web series. Every lifetime is presented as a small episode where you try, every character plays itself, and by the end of the life, let's put it this way, that there is a cliffhanger. Probably when we are on the deathbed, we ourselves are taking our own stock, that what did I do right and what did I not do right, or where in my journey did I start, and did I gyrate myself towards becoming that Paramatma. I'm sure that that is what we as a director at the end of the episode may sit back and say, okay, what happened? And then eventually when you go, and each lifetime you are constantly taking, now what may have happened is, you have, in your web series, you may have picked up a wrong plot which you want to correct. So you will go to the next episode, you will try to correct, you may get some other entanglements. But as the series evolves, there is more level of maturity, right? I mean, otherwise the web series would not conclude. So there would be more level of maturity, that subtleness of putting in all the previous conditionings or previous plots or learnings, you will bring it up to surface and then finish your web series at some point in time, right? So when I really look about, all these are connected, or rather to an extent, none of the journey in spirituality can be seen with the lens of only this life. You have to see it in totality as a progression, and see from this point in time, how do I take it furthermore?
Right. So now that it is there, what do we do with it, Naina? Can you help us with that?
It would be so nice if we could maybe book a table for 2, your ego and you, take it out for dinner and break up with it. I mean, can we do that? I don't think so. I wish it was so easy. But I think we can definitely do less with the ego, yes. Ego divides everything in 2 parts, what is mine and what is not mine. So it kind of makes us attached with a sense of ownership of things, people, relationships, like my mother, my father, my children, my house, my car. It's all about mine, mine, mine. And in that, I think it creates restrictions and boundaries around us, making us focus on a select few. And I think we must try to free ourselves from this limiting viewpoint of I, me, and mine. And my suggestion is that we should expand this boundary, and maybe a little bit at a time, because it can't happen suddenly. And we should just expand this concept of I, me, and mine a little bit. Maybe we can try a little bit of an exercise right now, if you think, to visualize this concept a little bit better.
Yes,
What do you think?
sure. Amazing. I think it would be a great idea. I think our audience would also be up for it. Thumbs up, dear audience, if let's just do this together.
Okay. Should we?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So I think I'm going to request everyone to close your eyes and imagine yourself as a center point with a circle around you, and you're the center of the circle. In that circle, add all that you think defines you. Your children, your professional achievements, your mother, father, husband, wife, friends, material possessions, your pets. I mean, fill up the circle till it's crowded with everything you think is yours.
Yes.
And now that you've done that, I think you can expand that boundary of the circle and create some space. How about including the sick child of the cook who comes to your house in that circle? You think you can create some kind of space, empathy, and compassion for that child, which is another's child and not just your own?
Yes.
How about your neighbor, the cleaner's mother, your distant relative, people you know and like? Add them into that second circle that we have just created right now. Now, once you've done that, expand it even further and include the trees, the ants, the co-worker you don't like, the friend who passed a nasty remark, and even the cockroach or lizard in your room. I know it's hard, but it's a third circle. You can do it. It's further away.
The lizard, well.
Yeah. And in the fourth and the last expansion, I think try including the entire existence of the universe. Now look at this entire concentric circles that you have created from a bird's eye view. And what we see is that if we go high enough, that all the individual people, things have merged into one single dot. And are the peoples and things from the first limiting circle still there? Yes, they are. But I think there are many more as well. I mean, we can open our eyes now, if some of you have them closed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is what we need to attempt to do. We need to expand this circle of I, me, and mine. And in the expansion of our self-identification lies the destruction of the limited ego.
Beautiful. So as I understand it, it is in the inclusiveness lies the destruction of separateness.
Absolutely. Yes. And, when we connect to the cosmic consciousness, what happens is that we expand much beyond our physical existence. We become a part of everything, just as everything becomes a part of us. And in a way, our identity expands from the individual I to the supreme I. And every one of us is the consciousness supreme. We have the same divine energy that Krishna had, or Ram, or Jesus, or Gurudev. However, we are limited by a lack of awareness. Aham Brahmasmi, I am that. I mean, is it easy to do? No. But bit by bit, we can try. And this limited self-identification can be systematically diminished. And if you genuinely want to widen your circle of empathy, you need to reduce your sense of the ego self. If you're constantly dwelling in the I, me, myself, how will you ever include all the other beings in your circle. And Tara and me were having this discussion offline as well, like just before the session started.
Hold on to this thought. In fact, Tara, I wanted to ask you, Naina, you mentioned Aham Brahmasmi. Yeah. So I just wanted to understand, does this mean that you are alluding to Aham Brahmasmi, Tara?
Well, as Naina has said, if we want to widen this circle of compassion, we have to get over the I, me, myself, right? I mean, if we're constantly in that phase of how am I feeling, how am I doing, am I rich, am I poor, am I well, am I unwell? If we take ourselves so seriously, then how will we widen the circle of compassion? So I actually wanted to bring the audience's attention to a yogic practice called Neti Neti. You can Google it and you can see YouTube videos about it. Now, Neti Neti essentially means I am not this and I'm not that. So that's the mental exercise that one needs to do. I'm not this physical body. I'm not daughter of, wife of, mother of, employee of. I'm not. I'm not how I'm feeling. I'm not my emotions. I'm not my sensations. Peel the layers of the onion of the identities that have been formed, that have been conditioned lifetime over lifetime. And as you peel these layers and de-identify with yourself, what remains after you've completely de-identified with your mind, body, and spirit? What remains? That is your true nature. And that true nature of yours is the true nature of every being, every single being around you. And that is your connection with the divinity in you, and that is your connection with everything around you. So, to know your real self, you have to unlearn everything that you thought was your real self. And, you know, it's so difficult to articulate and understand. I mean, I've been told for 35 years, this is my name, this is who I am, and this is my identity. And now you're telling me, let go of it. This world is not real. You are not real. It's very difficult to comprehend. And the question is, why should I do it? I mean, why should I engage in this exercise that's, involves such blood, sweat, and tears? After 40 years of conditioning, I'm okay. Thank you very much. The thing is that the ego deludes us so much into believing that we are only this physical body, that we're continuously riddled with pain and suffering. And knowing the ego is there and so attached to the physical body makes us believe that the pain and suffering we're enduring is really only on our physical body. It cannot touch the divinity within us. So, we're much stronger, and the real us is much more than our physical existence.
Yeah, Tara, I think what you just said is very interesting, where you said that why should we reduce the ego? And I think that ego seeks to serve itself. Ego seeks outward validation. Ego sees life as competition. And ego also comes from a place of lack. And the ability to see divinity in all comes from the negation of this ego and self. And that is really important as well.
Absolutely.
This keeps me thinking, as we may call ourselves the ordinary or the regular people, is it only that we, the ordinary, have an ego, or do other beings also have an ego, like animals, deities, divine beings, or even saints? Gajendra, what do you think?
So, sorry, I'm chuckling because I think this is the best question where you can actually come up to, some of our misunderstandings on ego to a fair extent. If I was to say you are Paramatma, then I'm sure you will not have ego. The beauty is, if you are Paramatma, nobody else can actually look at you to idealize you. So then there comes a second form, which is where I talked about that ego as a tool. There are some who would want to carry it as a tool so that people can follow. But let's come back a step. Many of us would have a pet at home. That pet is very territorial. and it doesn't like anybody coming into the house, or, unless it knows, it will not. So I'm sure we would agree that ego exists with. Now let's move on to another one. If you go to jungle, and all of us, those who have been able to, or even if you have watched a National Geographic or Discovery, the big cats like to mark their territory, and they communicate through scent. What are they doing? That means there is an ego. The definition of boundary, me, myself, is there. Right? Let's come to the Devi Devtas also. And the classical one that sticks to me is, if you want dhan, you go to Lakshmi. If you want knowledge, you go to Saraswati. If you want protection, you go to Durga Ma or Kali Ma. What has happened? I mean, if the divinity is also having an ego in a form that it has decided what it would help in for, then there is an ego in divinity also. Right? Now, I'm sure the divine may have decided that they want to give that specific form to themselves so that people can relate to it, or the common, I would not want to call it as common human being, but let's call it as, this short-term consciousness can actually relate to it and actually look upon or as a North Star, to constantly think that at least I have to reach there. And I'm sure once they're there, they would go furthermore. While I was thinking about this, there are two examples that I want to add in. Do we know that the ego also exists at the worshipping places? There is a temple which you may have started, or, you may have seen that suddenly there is a temple which is being created and it becomes very famous. Not only famous, but people come up saying कि आप उधर जाके अगर कुछ बोलोगे तो आपका काम होता है. So that means that consciousness is starting to build up there, and that consciousness is actually also having a certain amount of ego as an identity. And that identity is trying to help or do certain things basis that, right? So the ego in separation cannot exist. The other one, if you look at your own house, many of us keep this Ganpati or Ganeshi during the Ganesh festival. It is an idol which is made out of mitti, right? You have given it a form, you worship it at home. Why don't we just get the mitti and worship it? Technically, it should have done, right? But we need that form. That means we need that ego to actually look to. And then at the Visarjan, what we do is we actually go ahead and put it in water so that, what was given a form has become mitti again. So that is where the journey of human life or our existence from one life to become Paramatma, or Jivatma to become Paramatma, right? Because Jivatma is nothing but the self plus ego. जिस दिन विसर्जन कर दिया उस ego का, and we have reached to a state that we will dissolve ourselves to become that mitti, is where we would become Paramatma, right? So I would like to just bring up one shairi which I had, there was a nice phrase which came up कि इंसान तुझे गुरूर किस चीज का है कि तू मिट्टी के ऊपर खड़ा है लेकिन मरने के बाद तू मिट्टी के अंदर ही जाएगा, right? So I think that is the way I see it. You may give it forms, the ego will exist, but eventually till you don't return it back to the elements, you are stuck with Jivatma.
Right.
Make sense?
It does. In fact, here again, I would, the pertinent question is the quality of the ego, like the attributes of the ego. So when you speak about the saints, yes, they would have an ego, but the ego is used selflessly to serve and uplift other beings. So very true, very nice. From here, what comes to my mind is, what are some of the things, that we can do to overcome the ego? Or are there any stages of overcoming the ego? Tara, may I ask you this question first?
Yeah, so obviously, taking from what we've been talking about in the last few minutes, a large part of overcoming the ego is seeing that divinity, seeing that oneness in you, me, the cockroach on the wall, the lizard that we don't like, the nasty coworker, the friend that, was backbiting about you. How do you see divinity in these people? It's easy to say, practically very hard to execute. So Gurudev had given a tool, and I find that this tool has worked for me. So I'd like to outline it. Try and see an orange Om sign in everything around you, whether it's the chair that's immediately in front of you, or your desk or the book, or it's another human being or an animal, whatever it is. Try and visualize an Om on every single object. This visualization exercise psychs one into believing that the same divinity that is within you is in everybody else. And I can guarantee you that if you do this exercise for 30 days straight, you will see miraculous results. I mean, I have found that I am more forgiving, more accepting, and definitely less judgmental. So I would highly recommend this exercise.
Tara, that's really nicely said. And if I may add, I think, what do you think of detachment as another tool that could be practiced?
That would be, can you give us a bit more on that, Naina?
I think like maybe detachment from self could be another tool that should be practiced in a way that we can learn to be an observer of our own life instead of taking everything personally. So every few hours or days or whenever you can remember, maybe one can pause for a minute and kind of become the CCTV camera in your room and observe yourself as an outsider. And definitely don't forget to laugh at yourself.
Right. That's really nice. So if we go on to, what advice would you give as a takeaway in context of the ego? I mean, and this question is for all three of you. Yeah. So, I mean, I leave it.
Anjali, what I would say is that I think first we need to acknowledge the existence of the ego and the fact that self-identification exists in all of us. Only by becoming aware and knowing that we need to get rid of this self-identification can we take a step forward. And I think getting rid of this self-identification is a requirement for spiritual advancement. And that would be the first step.
Okay. Tara?
Anjali, I mean, my advice to the audience, even if I was to give one key takeaway, would be physically apply neti neti to yourself every single day. Put an alarm clock on your phone, a reminder that says neti neti at 9 a.m. and at 5 p.m. At 9 a.m., you'll probably be looking at yourself in the mirror and not happy with your body. At that time, tell yourself, neti, neti. I know it's very convenient, but say, neti, neti, I'm not this body. I don't need to identify with my body. At 5 in the evening, when your alarm says neti, neti, you're probably sitting with your work colleagues, exhausted, dwelling on your performance in your current job. You are not defined by your job, by your performance at work. That does not define the real you, the true you. So please practice neti neti. It's a difficult concept. We are really hardwired and conditioned into believing that all that is around us and all we see is us, but that couldn't be further away from the truth. And truly imbibe that to understand your real self, you have to get rid of everything that you know yourself to be.
Okay. Gajendra, what about you?
I think I would pick up something which was brought up in one of the in conversation live sessions only. I would only wake up to say good morning, Maya. The reason that I would say good morning, Maya is similar to what Tara just mentioned. Right? wake up in the morning, you are doing your act. So to carry that, to go ahead and say, I have this car, I have this nice job, or I've got this, or to an extent to say that I am going to do this good deed today, I'm going to serve 10. All this end of the day is Maya. So just do it because you are acting. You don't have to do it because you own it. I think that was very well put to say that I would simply go ahead and want, or it has worked for me actually, to a fair extent. Good morning, Maya.
Fabulous. And now I leave the house open for questions from the audience. We have a question here by Swet saying that, so do we even have a chance of getting rid of the ego? And if I may add to the question, do we really want to focus on getting rid of the ego?
So can I try and take a jibe at it? And
yes, please, Gajendra.
I would try to do it in Hindi because I just saw that somebody said we should. So कोशिश करने में तो बुराई नहीं है ना. एंड उससे ज्यादा अगर हमको ये पता है कि आखिर में हमको जाके उस परम आत्मा को मिलना है, तो क्यों नहीं हो सकता? अगर हम ये मानते हैं, अगर आप किसी के सामने खड़े हो, आप बोलते हो आपका जो भी विजन है कि परमात्मा है, उनके पास ईगो है, एंड अगर आपको लगता है कि नहीं है, तो वो छोड़ तो सकते हैं ना, राइट? तो कोशिश करने में कोई बुराई नहीं है, एंड कोशिश होके ये जरूर हो सकता है. अभी जो भी हमने ये पिछले 10 मिनट में डिस्कस किया कि डिटैचमेंट या ओनरशिप नहीं लेना, ये हमारा नहीं है, अगर ये सब हम समझ पाए तो जरूर हो सकता है. और इसके लिए अगर हमको ये पता है कि ये सारे हमारे औजार है, these are our tools, ego is only a tool. अगर इस फॉर्म में, अगर आप कोई काम कर रहे हो, आप किसी ऑफिस में किसी ओहदे पे हो, तो दो ऑप्शन हमारे पास है. या तो हम अपना घमंड बताएं एंड अपना रुतबा बताते हुए अपना काम करवाएं, या दूसरा ये कि हम हमारे रुतबे के साथ ये दूसरों को जताए कि आप भी यहाँ पे आ सकते हो. ये पोजीशन है, लेकिन ये पोजीशन मुझे नहीं डिफाइन कर रही. ये रुतबा जो है ये इस जॉब का है, और आप ये जॉब के पास आ सकते हो, क्योंकि रिटायरमेंट तो हर एक की होनी है ना. तो आपके जॉब में किसी और को तो आना ही पड़ेगा. तो ईगो अगर छोड़ दोगे या उसको खाली एक टूल, एक औजार के हिसाब से हेल्प करोगे, तो फिर आपके नेक्स्ट जनरेशन भी आपके साथ तैयार हो गए. Sorry, I tried to take a jibe at it in Hindi. I hope it communicated well.
I'm sure it did. And from here we go on to the next question. That I had thought that if ego allows us to establish ownership of things around us, so goes our action. In that case, isn't ego also instrumental in accelerating self-awareness, thus making us more aware of ourselves and leading us towards a more thoughtful life? If I disconnect my actions with myself and remove the I, like Ms. Naina said, to break up with ego, how would I take ownership of my bad actions and thus improve from there? Please share your thoughts.
Anjali, that's taking ownership of your bad actions is the worst thing, because the minute we take ownership of our bad actions, we are attaching emotion to it, attaching guilt to it, attaching some kind of judgment to it, which then forms the loop in adding to our samskaras and creating more baggage for us to shed in our next lifetime. So we should definitely practice the art of self-observation, but that self-observation should be from a third-person perspective, almost like watching a movie of your life. And that should have no judgment and no emotion attached to it. It should just be purely observation for improving your guna mix, for becoming more sattvic, from doing better than you did yesterday or we did yesterday, but it should definitely not be attached with ownership or emotion. I hope
Without
that.
crucifying yourself for having done
Sorry?
something wrong. Without crucifying yourself from having done anything wrong, or patting your back for having done anything
Yes,
right.
yes,
So it
yes,
is
absolutely.
be clear of any form of judgment.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Accepting yourself on an as is, where is basis is a tool for negation of ego in a way.
That's quite true. That's quite true. It sort of opens the doors for not only just accepting yourself, but then accepting every being or everything else around you, every situation, every emotion, every action, every non-action. Yeah. So now there was another question here saying that I understand it intellectually that I'm not the ego, but that has not changed anything. So I think a recap on what can you do to bring about the change. If I may, Tara?
So to bring about that change, if it's we're told we're part of the the divinity of the consciousness supreme. It's very difficult to articulate this concept of the consciousness supreme. I mean, even Adi Sankaracharya, the great sage, when he wrote his famous poem the Nirvana Shaktam, he didn't write what the consciousness supreme is. He just wrote what you are not, because even for him it was difficult to articulate what the consciousness supreme is, I'm assuming. So since if somebody like him couldn't do it, it's very hard for us to articulate. So we should engage in this process of negation. And by the negation, I go back to what I had talked about, neti neti. you know Constantly have like a message pop up in your mind 10 times a day, neti neti. I'm not this, I'm not that. And what you'll find is that what really remains when you attempt this neti neti on a day to day, you will find clarity if you engage in this process.
Right. Thank you, Tara. And with this, I think we could conclude if one of you would like to conclude the session today.
No, I think, I would just want to sum up what Tara mentioned. कोशिश कर तो सकते हैं, नामुमकिन तो नहीं है, लेकिन कोशिश तो कर सकते हैं. एंड हर छोटी स्टेप आपको नजदीक तो ले जा सकती है. आप अगर एक स्माइल किसी को दे रहे हो तो आपका गुरु उस समय भी टूट रहा है. जो नैना ने दायरा बनाया कि आप उसको बढ़ाते जाओ, आपका गुरु उस समय भी टूट रहा है. तो हर एक को उस हिसाब से देखना और कोशिश करना, ये मुमकिन है. एंड अगर ये इस लाइफ में मुमकिन है तो एटलीस्ट ये तो होगा कि इवेंचुअली आप नेक्स्ट लाइफ के लिए इसके लिए तो तैयार हो रहे हो कि अभी इसके आगे इससे बेटर करना है. राइट. सो आई थिंक अपने आप पे इतना हार्ड होना कि सब इसी लाइफ टाइम में खत्म होना है इज डिफिकल्ट. राइट. So anyway, so if we were to sum up, ego on its own, बिना ईगो के आपका खुद का एग्जिस्टेंस नहीं है. एंड अगर है तो उसको टूल बना के आगे बढ़ने में शायद से आप परमात्मा के नजदीक जा सकते हो. दैट इज द बॉटम लाइन. Whatever detachment that we talk about, Aham Brahmasmi that we talk about, end of the day, as far as we are able to make our effort towards some of these detachment, looking everybody or looking divinity in everybody, सबके अंदर खुदाई देखना, that itself will shatter the ego to no extent.
Correct.
So but I want you to summarize because you are the host.
So from what I have understood from all of you today, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, is that There is no error of egoism or personality in the transcendental category of the divine, because it is the integrity of all consciousness, just as the sea is a collection of all its waves and waters. This is something I've read. I haven't, made it up. But from here, I understand that the self is universal, eternal, one and without divisions. The expansive or exalted feeling that I am everything and I am all this does not constitute egoism. However, when we get stuck with with the feeling of that I am so and so, or I have achieved so and so, we separate ourselves, from this eternal whole, or what we call as the consciousness supreme, or the universal self. And when we are under the influence of this delusion and ignorance, it develops a very limited view of itself as it separates us as an identity. But once we recognize this ego, and we don't need to work ourselves to squash it down or erase it, and put in all our focus into trying to kill it. What we really need to do is understand that this feeling of separateness is because of the sense of duality. It's an idea of being distinct and different from others, which we are not. It's a false perception of oneself, and it is limiting. So what we need to do is just accept it, watch it, keep it in your pocket, and use it to climb up the ladder and get closer to the divinity within all of us. So this is how I would conclude it. And please do tell me if I've missed anything.
See, that's the beauty, right? We know that you will be able to conclude it much better. Well said.
No, but I think it is because of the three of you today. I mean, there seems to be some bit of clarity on what ego is. And this is a topic that I think we've all been debating for very long. Yeah. So thank you very much, Tara, Naina, and Gajendra, for helping us with this subject. And for our audience, thank you again for patiently listening to us. We have something here to offer by one of our listeners like you. If you remember in our last session, we announced about a workshop on managing and growing your wealth and money. So on Tuesday, the 23rd of November at 7 p.m., Sridevi Manoj has very graciously offered to do a free workshop on investology, managing and growing your wealth. We will be sharing the link on the comment section today, and the link is also on the Facebook page and on Insta page. Please do register yourself. It is open for all age groups from all backgrounds, for housewives, for professionals, for students, for anyone who wants to understand money. Yeah. Once you register, we will be sending you a link, a Zoom link, so that you could participate. It's at 7 p.m. on 23rd of November, but the link would be sent only to those who register. So request you all to please do register. With that, good night, Shubh Ratri, Sayonara. See you next fortnight. Thank you very much.